Nigeria's construction sector is set to benefit from massive spending by the government this year. Now, real estate developers are hoping this will boost the sector, stressing that its survival is largely dependent on the overall performance of the economy. Paul Onwuanibe, Chief Executive Officer of Landmark, joins us in the studio for a real estate focus. Thank you so much, Paul. Pleasure to have you here today.
My pleasure. Good morning.
If you look at the headlines, most days it's all about the economy, and most times it's not positive news. But I was just looking at some forecasts among some real estate experts. It's mixed, but I still sense some positive element coming out of this, some of those statements. I was looking at one from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and the report says that Nigeria's real estate sector will be valued at $13.6 billion this year from $9.1 billion previously. So obviously they're optimistic, and regardless of the situation, they still see potential for growth. Where do you see positives?
Okay, well, I suppose, thank you for that. I suppose there are two issues here. One is, or there are two parts of the Nigerian real estate sector. One is the informal part, and we'll call it sort of the high net worth individuals that develop. We call it the DIY developers. And the second section is the institutional part, which are the developers that develop as an institution and use institutional finance. So what I see is that there's a big transformation over the last sort of year or two from the DIY sector to the institutional real estate developers. And that brings in sort of more finance, brings in more opportunities, and brings in more scale. So I think that's why there's a lot of reason for optimism.
Now, at the end of the day, if a developer has money, he can source funds, produce the buildings, construct the estates, as the case may be. At the end of the day, it lies in demand, and how much of that is met would rely heavily on the purchasing power of customers, people who are going to buy. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, that's largely dependent on the state of the economy. We've seen how the Forex issue has impacted on bottom lines of many corporates. So isn't that still an issue, regardless of how much supply the market can bring?
It is, but the biggest issue about real estate is numbers, so it's people. So when you talk about demand and supply, because it's a long-term game, not a short-term game, unlike other commodities, it takes time to produce real estate. So our job is to predict the future. So we're talking today for 3 years' time, or 4 years' time, or 5 years' time, depending on what you are building. So when you look at the demographic trends and you look at the numbers, and not just in Africa, but not just in Nigeria, but in Africa and regionally, you can see that people have to eat somewhere, they have to shop somewhere, they have to sleep somewhere, they have to work somewhere. And they say Nigeria or Africa is the last piece of blue sky left. So there's a lot of people waiting at the borders of Africa for appropriate legislation to come in. So I think the future is bright. Okay,
now for the banking sector, we've been talking about mergers. For the insurance sector, the word merger has come up. Now for the real estate sector, I mean, joint ventures, mergers, are there prospects for that this year? Is that something you would recommend, especially for those who are struggling?
Okay, so joint ventures, yes. Mergers are a little bit more complicated because you get into each other's businesses. But joint ventures, I mean, obviously real estate is made for joint ventures because different people bring different things. Financial institutions bring the money, contractors bring the construction, landowners bring the land, developers bring the know-how. So there you are. There's a JV right there for every single development if you want one.
Okay, let's talk about the office development segment. Some believe that this will experience a massive boom in 2016. Is that your sentiment too?
Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt.
Why is that? What have you seen? Give us some pointers.
Well, I think when you look at the way the economy is expanding, or the economy should expand, and a number of things have stagnated the economy recently, and I think over the next sort of few months or a year or so, we'll see some of these things open up. And as they open up, there are a large number of institutions, global, regional, and local institutions, literally sitting on the borders, not making decisions now about their real estate because of where we are with the economy. When those decisions are made, all of a sudden, demand will be created. When demand is created and real estate developers react, it still takes 3 years to do it, so there'll be an acute shortage in the short term. And we'll go back to the days of, gosh, I think 6, 7 years ago, when 10 square meters of demand was chasing 1 square meter of supply.
Okay, now I understand that Lagos will continue, or right now still remains the front runner, especially in the office lettable space. Do you concur to that?
Yes, I do at this point in time. But I suppose that Lagos has to remain the front runner. Lagos has to make sure its policies and its enabling environment continue to work in favor of the producers. Because I do know that there are quite a number of, there's quite a lot of demand, and institutions that have gone outside the borders of Lagos State and outside the borders of Nigeria to areas that have provided sort of a more enabling environment.
Now, we've asked this question several times about how the foreign exchange situation is impacting on developers. What is your point of view?
Oh, wow. So big time, it has. And I think real estate has received a triple whammy. The first is obviously about 65% of the real estate or of construction materials are imported. So there's a big whammy there in that we spend a lot more money trying to bring the stuff in. So if you predict a building will cost you $10, it will probably cost you $12 or $13. Second whammy is the people paying. So whilst you've priced it in dollars and you've probably raised your money linked to dollars, you're paying for it, your people renting are paying in Naira. And because there's that gap between the central bank rate and the parallel rate, that accounts for 30% of the deficit as well.
Let's talk about government policies this year. Are you optimistic? We've heard so much about the budget and how it's expected to boost economic growth this year. Does it give you confidence? Are you hopeful that we will see that much needed growth this year, especially in key sectors like housing?
So I do believe so. I think this current government is a social government, and we still wait to see those policies executed. But it's a social government, and with the social government, some big expenditures required: power, roads, infrastructure, housing, hospitals. So I think with that, if those demands are met and or the government does supply and execute to that, then we'll see a big change.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul, for talking to us today.
Pleasure having you here today. Thank you very much.
I've been speaking to Paul Onwuanibe, Chief Executive Officer of Landmark. Paul is also a member of the Young Presidents Organization, the YPO.